Okay, hi everyone. This is my first time I'm doing this, so don't judge. All right, so we kind of went through a bunch of stuff today. This is the aim that was on the board. This is obviously the do now. This video should take about 10 minutes, and you could potentially have a quiz on this tomorrow, so just be aware of it. I just want to go over a few things that I didn't get to today in class, and I think that will kind of help us move forward. But remember, the basic concept of what we did today was this idea of state building. You guys read in the homework about state building in China, and you read about state building in Europe, and they're both kind of distinct in their own ways. We're not going to really go into China today, but we are going to go into a little bit more about what goes on in Europe. And some of this stuff is going to be repetitive, but that's okay, right? All right. So we blew through this in class today, and this is kind of a map of what's going on in Europe. But I want you to remember that until around 1300 or so, you have the development of feudalism in Europe, and everything is kind of decentralized states where everything is being run by lords, and it's like a strict social hierarchy, but it's completely decentralized. The kings are kind of nowhere to be found. They're kind of just living their lives. You have the Holy Roman Empire, which is really in name only. It's really not doing a whole lot. So there's not a lot of political structure in Europe that's kind of centralizing force. The only thing that is a centralizing force in Europe, and I don't think we talked about this enough in class today, is the Christian church, right? The church is staying there, and people are still looking to the church for help and for what they're doing, but it's not like a political institution. It does keep things together, but remember that it's that feudalism. So feudalism is essentially going to come to an end, guys and girls. Feudalism is going to come to an end for a couple of different reasons. So one reason is going to be you have the plague and you have this idea of internal problems. You guys can see that on the PowerPoint. What I want you to remember is that the plague is going to disrupt society for a few reasons. One, you're going to have the death of all the lords. And that's going to allow a lot of the serfs who had to work the land for protection, that's going to allow them to kind of disappear. Then you're going to have, additionally, let me just move that over, so you guys can see the whole thing. Then you're also going to have, the plague is going to disrupt the economy as well, because what essentially is going to happen is this idea that there's not going to be as much, not as much labor out there. So people are going to start acquiring jobs and making more money, and demanding more money. And that's going to kind of disrupt the feudal system as well. Lastly, remember the Crusades. I know this isn't on here at all, but the Crusades are definitely going to change things. And the reason why the Crusades are going to change things is because a lot of those lords are going to disappear. They're going to go down to, the Middle East. A lot of them aren't going to come back. And feudalism is essentially going to break down. Also, the economy of Europe is going to change as well because of it, because you're going to have all these people that are going to be making more money, which is again allowing them to move forward. Like this, we talked about in class today, there's going to be those new social classes that are going to kind of occur. You're going to have the development of this middle class, and that's going to be important as we move forward. But the middle class is going to be more important. That's going to be made up of like artisans and merchants, and banking, like a lot of banking. But you're going to still have that old nobility, that privileged class, which we talked about in class today, that is going to be above them. And then the lower class is going to be those peasants. But just remember that that social hierarchy is going to kind of change because the Crusades, because now Europe is open for trade. So all of this stuff is going on. And then what we see is, we see the establishment of these new monarchs. Okay? And here's a slide. I pulled it up really quickly in class today, but I want you to be able to see it. What I want you to be aware is that the two things that the new monarchs are going to do to achieve power is one, it's going to be taxation, and two, it's going to be the building up of armies. So for the majority of them, that includes England and France, and we're going to come back to them in a second, and Russia, there's going to be this element of we have to deal with things, and the way that we're going to deal with them is we're going to tax the hell out of people, in addition to building these really, really strong armies. So I'm not going to read off the slide to you, but the two obstacles that these monarchs are going to have to deal with in order to centralize their authority, because that's essentially what they're doing. That's a key note. Centralization of authority. What they're going to have to do is they're going to have to deal with the nobility. And the way they deal with the nobility, this old privileged class to make these kings, these new monarchs, is they're going to have to come up with a system of taxation, and they're going to have to control the nobility by taxing them. But they're also going to have to sit there and use the middle class to make this all worthwhile. And the middle class is going to essentially be, the middle class is going to be like almost like a weapon to use against nobility, right? These wealthy people that don't have privileges, but are going to eventually make more money, than actually the old nobility. So one thing they're going to do is use the nobility. They're going to use the middle class to deal with the nobility. But the big thing is heavy taxation, right? They're going to use that tax to start making an army. That's going to be most famous in places like England and France. And we're going to look at them again in a second with the 100 Years' War. But this building up of an army that is going to be very loyal to the crown. And instead of them being loyal to the lords, which is what it was during the Middle Ages, now you have this loyalty to the crown, which is going to be a big deal. So you have this big army, which is going to result in expansion. You see this used sanctions and things like that in all those different places. So generally, that's kind of what's going to happen. Now, moving forward, I wanted to talk to you. This is what we didn't get to in class today, and I wanted to just mention this. France and England are going to go to war, and it's called the 100 Years' War, and it's really a battle over land. But what it does is it solidifies those areas as these like almost like nation states controlled by particular monarchs. The new monarchs that you have to be aware of in England, I believe it was Henry VII, and in France it was Louis XI. And their buildup of these monarchs, which is kind of a result of the 100 Years' War, is going to be very important to moving forward. And in both of these places, they're going to do things to try to control the nobility. One, in England, they're going to create something called the Star Chamber. And the Star Chamber was basically a way for the king to bring in nobility and kind of like hold them accountable for all their actions. In France, they're going to develop something called the intendant system. And the intendant system was using normal middle-class people, merchants, to kind of oversee what's going on with the nobility and, trying to control them. So England and France are going to do it very, very traditional ways. Their deal is that they have to deal with the nobility, they have to deal with any kind of issues with the church, and they're going to build up these strong, strong armies. And that is going to centralize their authority. In Russia, you got Ivan the Great. And the big thing with the Russians is that they're going to be a little different than every place else because they still have the Mongols hanging around. Remember, the Russians are the Golden Horde. What they're going to essentially do is they're going to stop paying tribute to the Mongols. Ivan the Great is basically going to say, forget it, we're done with you. He's going to move the capital out of Kiev, and he's going to move it to Moscow, and he's going to begin to expand Russia. And that's an important idea. So Russia is going to go they have to deal with the Mongols more than anything else. They are going to have to deal with the nobility there as well. And they're going to have to deal with rebellion. And if you check out the textbook, they'll talk a little bit more about some of the rebellions. But they have to really use a strong military to control anything that's going to possibly happen. Now, Spain is something that's completely different. And as I told you guys in class, you have the marriage of Isabella and Ferdinand, right? I believe it's, Isabella was from, I think she's from Castilla, and Ferdinand was from Aragon. They're the two largest provinces of Spain. And the way that they create Spain, right, this centralization of authority, that's the theme, these new monarchs. In Spain, what they essentially do is the marriage itself is going to bring things together. And they're going to do all the things that England and France do. They're going to build an army. They're going to tax people. They're going to use a group called the Hermandados, which was middle-class people, right? Those merchants, again, to control the nobility. So they're going to do all that. But one of their big issues that they had was this. They had, if you look in the south, I'll show you right here. If you look in the south over here, this area was really controlled by Muslims still, especially the city of Granada. So one of the things that the Catholic kings, right, that's what Ferdinand and Isabella are known for, is that they sat there and they said, okay, we got to get rid of these people. And this is where they begin this idea of the Reconquista, or the reconquering of Spain. And what they essentially do here is they force out the Muslims. And they get the Muslims out of the country in order to regroup the whole thing. And by doing this, they're going to solidify their forces. So they're going to go after the Muslims. They're also, during this time, and by the way, the 1492 is not a coincidence, right? That's the same time as Christopher Columbus. They kind of coincide with one another, this idea of spreading Catholicism. At the same time, Spain has a large Muslim population. And during the Reconquista, they also forced many of the Jews to go forward and try to deal with, the Jewish problem in Spain. So what they do is they, hold on one second. What they do essentially in Spain is they force the Jews to convert. And Jews do. But then moving forward, that conversion is not enough for people. So that's what we have what's called the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was Spain trying to eliminate what they consider to be a problem to the unification. And they end up either killing Jews or they throw them out of the country. And they get permission from the Pope to do this. And this, for me, is very Machiavellian, right? They're willing to eliminate an entire portion of their population to solidify their rule. Okay? So just keep that in mind with the Spanish. This is all evidential, right? This is all pieces of evidence that you could use in a potential essay about this idea of state building at this point in time. And then this is just a question that I want you guys to take a look at tonight. You can just look at it. You don't have to do anything with it. We're going to approach it tomorrow. This is a question that I kind of made. It's not great, and it's not something you would ever write an essay for, but it kind of gives you that idea of a development argument that evaluates state building. So it's asking you really compare and contrast, I believe. What I need you guys to start doing is you have to start thinking of an argument and then trying to come up with evidence to support that argument. So just to review, two things. One, we know that we know why this is all happening when it is, right? For all the Mongols, Crusades, the plague. And we need to understand that what's happening in Europe is the centralization of authority. That's the state building. And they're doing this through heavy taxation. They're doing this through building up the military. They're doing this by controlling the nobility so they don't get in their way. And all of these different processes are happening at the same time. What you have to be able to do is show evidence of each. Why is Spain different? Spain is different because they go out and they go after the Muslims and the Jews, whereas England doesn't have to do that. France doesn't have to do that. They have their own problems. They have problems with their nobility that they have to deal with. So just keep that in mind as you go. And I think that's it. Keep in mind some of the vocabulary because I might ask you about it tomorrow. You should have taken notes. I hope you did. All right? Later.